Okay, so enough about buckets. I know that got a little weird there, but yeah, just think about it a little bit. Think about the bucket a little bit. It might make a little sense. So again, Emerson, big on human spiritual potential, and he believed that we have the ability to transcend the materialistic world of our sense experience and facts. So, again, not to harp too much on the bucket, but this idea that we can turn around, we can look inward and not just outward, that other animals are really, they are kind of stuck in a purely materialistic world of sense experience and facts. They don't have the ability to transcend that reality by looking inward to the whole inner universe that is you. It's both inner and outer universe. As Emerson said, I am a transparent eyeball. But anyway, it's both at the same time. He believed humans can become conscious of the all-pervading spirit of the universe and the potentialities of human freedom. We just have to open up. We have to leave ourselves open to it. And that when it says all-pervading, that means that everything, it's the same light shining through every hole in that bucket. Right? We all have the same all-pervading spirit of the universe trying to come through us. It's just we have to be able to become conscious of it to tap into it, and that we all can become free when we do that. And he believed God could best be found by looking inward into your own self, into your own soul, that all the answers are in you already. So he believed strongly in freedom of action, that human beings need to be, it's kind of going back to that Thomas Jefferson philosophy of looking at people, that you have to give people freedom in order for them to make the choices and decisions and the actions that they need to be able to look inside themselves and to truly know themselves deeply. And he believed that each one of us can change our own world according to our ideals and according to our conscience. So again, very idealistic, that it's the human potential idea that each one of us has the potential to change the world. So a quote that I really like from Henry David Thoreau, where he says, "Goodness is the only investment that never fails." It's true. If you do good things, it's almost never a bad move. There's really, very little risk involved with just doing the right thing and being good. So this wasn't just philosophical. It wasn't just academic. It wasn't just talked about in salons and parlors and written about and read about, whatever. The Transcendentalists were actually super radical in what they believed was necessary for the kind of social change that would allow each person to tap into their own potential. So a lot of this stuff will be like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. But at the time, super radical. So votes for women. What? Women being able to vote. It's crazy, right? No, Transcendentalists were actually pretty super feminist. They believed that women, all of this applied as much to women as it did for men, and that they needed to be given the freedom to have an intellectual world and life as well, versus just basically being an extension of your husband and family, that women have their own minds too. So this is actually the reason we have the writer Louisa May Alcott, who was the daughter of Bronson Alcott, a really pretty famous transcendentalist as well. He actually ran this crazy school. Well, we'd call it crazy, but he had this school for kids that was based on transcendentalist philosophy. I might talk more about it later because it's cool. Actually, that would make a really good free-for-all project. But so she wrote Little Women, and because her father was such kind of a proto-feminist because of his transcendentalist philosophy, he strongly encouraged her and her sisters in their writing and believed that they had as much spiritual and intellectual capabilities as any man, which he wasn't harping on them about getting married and having kids. He's like, no, you do what you need to do. And he and other transcendentalists believed that women had just as much of a right to help steer our political future as men. They also were really appalled by the conditions of workers during the Industrial Revolution and the way that humans were becoming treated more and more like machines versus humans, because everything is really in industrial mechanics. Everything is mechanized. Like everything is based on this idea that it's all about productivity, and the more that you can kind of reduce the humanity of the people making the products, the more you can profit off of it. So conditions were pretty appalling, and they were some of the first to really lobby and argue for better conditions. Like, no, each one of those people on that assembly line is just as much has just as much of a need for like meaningful work as anyone else. And that's something we still run into today. Like, we still run into this question of like, is having meaningful work in our lives, like, is that a privilege that only some people should be able to have, or is that a universal human right? They would argue that it's a universal human right. They believed that drinking and being intemperate really in any area of your life, like eating to excess, drinking to excess, or just drinking at all, smoking, any of that kind of stuff, any of those kinds of like things that we use to distract ourselves from ourselves to get away from our own reality, like they believe we use those things to kind of muffle the voice within us, which, okay, it's hard to argue with that. They were pretty strict about it, though. They wanted like no drinking ever for anyone at any time. So I don't know. You can feel how you want to about that. They also wanted they argued for a much simpler way of dressing and eating, because again, this kind of anti-materialistic, like, no, we don't need all like fancy outfits all the time. Like, this is stupid. Like, all you need is like the basics, like kind of a live simply philosophy. You know, if you've ever seen those t-shirts that say live simply or whatever, it's like that. Same thing with diet too. They were actually, a lot of transcendentalists were vegetarians, which, okay, there's a lot of vegetarians now, but the time that was really, really unusual, like super unusual. So, but they, again, it was kind of this idea of like moderation and, not living a miserable life, but just living like a really simple life. Again, this idea of like having a more kind of free and open religion that anyone could take part in. They had, again, like Bronson Alcott's school. So at the time, schooling was really, it was this idea of like, if you can't recite this correctly, or if you're not doing it right, then you need to be punished for that. It's hard to imagine. Well, no, it's not hard to imagine now, but because we still have things like grades and stuff like that. But at the time, it was much more physical punishment. Like, if you can't do it correct, if you get a bad grade, like, or you can't say your alphabet correctly, like, you're going to get whooped basically in front of everybody, or stuck in the corner with a dunce cap on, kind of a thing. Like, the transcendentalists were very against that. So Bronson Alcott School, for instance, was very, again, kind of the spirit, kind of trying to encourage the potential of every child, that there was no labeling of some children as dunces or smart, whatever, like, but that all children had potential, and it was much more free and open. And in fact, he had this kind of interesting policy of, if a child, there was absolutely no ever striking of children, even if they misbehaved. And if a child misbehaved, instead, he would have the child strike him, the teacher, to try to teach them that when you misbehave, you're hurting other people. So I don't know how well that worked, but anyway, I'm sure he got a lot of, raised eyebrows for that, but a lot of innovations that we keep today, but this idea that, like, no, I mean, you can't call children stupid and punish them when they don't get things right. Like, that's not how people learn well, and it's really traumatizing. And they were 110% against slavery. They were totally disgusted that slavery is still very legal and still very much around during this time. And this is something that comes up in particular with Thoreau's civil disobedience. Basically this idea of like, okay, well, if my tax dollars are going to support a war, or which I'm against, or support a nation that still allows slavery, like, I'm not going to give my money to that. You can't have it. And so he ends up going to jail for that. And he's like, cool, great. And he's like, this is the best night of my life, going to jail because I won't support the legalized institution of slavery, because I know even if it's legal, it doesn't matter. It's still wrong. So, yeah, very against that. So, if you were in a face-to-face class, and this is something you might be called upon to talk about on the next test 2, yeah, you're probably going to need to talk about it, just saying. I would ask you to find 3 examples of this these philosophies we've been talking about, Emerson's Transcendentalist philosophy in self-reliance. And you can't throw a stone and not hit some kind of philosophical message or idea. It's very densely packed with that. So you're going to need to talk about 3 of them, though. So please read Self-Reliance. I mean, even the title, it's so American, right? This idea of like, no, rely on yourself. That's, the highest act that Emerson said we could do. So Thoreau, like I said, was hugely influenced by Emerson's work and this idea of self-sufficiency, relying on yourself, like the confidence and success and all the ways that we measure ourselves need to come from an inner measuring stick. They need to be that you need to, be your own person and do your own thing and rely on yourself, not just like, not kind of in the way that we think of now where it's like, helping other people is bad because then they get lazy and they won't, they need to rely on themselves. Not at all. It was more like, don't look to other people for your sense of self-worth and self-esteem and self-value. That was pretty big because they don't know, really truly know you, and they don't truly necessarily know what's best for you. Like, the more you try to imitate other people and the more you look outward for your sense of validation, like the more miserable you're going to be. And that's why I think they'd be interested in this whole kind of social media culture too, because we know that it's starting to really mess people up because they're constantly looking outward for validation. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like that we need to get rid of social media or anything. I'm just, you guys know what I'm saying though, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? So Thoreau kind of picks up the torch, and he believed that we just need to look into our own hearts for spiritual guidance. So similar to Emerson, he believed we need to have courage to be ourselves, that it's like the most terrifying thing you can do a lot of the time, and that you like just go out there and be yourself. It's really, really hard to do, right? It's scary, it can be. And that you need to just trust in yourself. Trust in that inner force within you. Like everything you need is already in you, and people are going to try to make fun of you, and they're going to try to make you feel bad, and then try to get, why can't you just be like this? You're making everything harder for us and everybody else. Like, screw that is what he'd say. Screw it. Do your own thing. Like, don't listen to them. You go out there, get on with your bad self. And he believed that you got to live your life according to your own intuitively derived principles for living. Like, do not look outward for even your parents, your church, your friends. Like, that if you look for those kinds of answers, if you look for what's right or what's wrong outside of you, then it's just not going to work. Like, you've got to look inward for that stuff. So he said, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path, and leave a trail. Get out there and blaze that trail. So I've got another video and the corresponding videos about Thoreau's philosophy that does a much better job explaining it than I'm doing right now. So please watch that. It really does help make sense of a lot of things he's talking about, particularly civil disobedience. So if you were in my class physically, or let's say taking a test, I would ask you for 3 examples from Thoreau's writings, either Civil Disobedience or Walden, which is like his kind of autobiographical experience, getting back to nature by himself, solitude, all that. You'd find 3 examples of Thoreau using his own life experiences and observations to illustrate transcendental principles in action, because that's what he did that Emerson wasn't so hot at. Like, Emerson kind of came up with a more abstract expression of the philosophies, and Thoreau found a way to apply it to like everyday life that really resonated with people. So they were kind of a team in that way. Okay, well, that's that. I hope you go out and live your life transcendentally, or at least try. That's the best you can do sometimes. Look inward, right? Not just outward. All right. Have a good day/night.